Continue to unpack that two-day stint of the president at the Zondo Commission. And now staying with this story, we now welcome political analyst Sanusha Naidu. Sanusha, thank you so much for making the time this morning. Two sides here. One side feeling, we just spoke to our political editor, that the president didn't disclose much. And another side thinking the president was being strategic. He still knows of the threats that exist that are not necessarily historical. And he was trying to navigate, on the one hand, opening up to South Africans, and on the other hand, managing these threats. Your thoughts?
Good morning, Desiree, and to the viewers. I think you kind of really characterized the two kinds of competing interpretations of the president's appearance at the Zondo Commission over the past 2 days. And I think even when he appeared at the Zondo Commission previously, the challenge for the president is actually to try and find that middle ground between these two competing interpretations. I think the idea that the president would come to the Zondo Commission, firstly, was the idea that, this was unprecedented. He availed himself. And of course, it was quite a historical moment in our 27 years of a democracy. I think in terms of its ventilation, there were some very important dynamics to extrapolate in terms of the president's appearance before the commission. On the other hand, I think there was the expectation. And I think the expectation falls within these two interpretations that we've just highlighted. The one being that he would actually provide a much more detailed account, if not intricate account of details around how the state capture has emerged, how the state capture ventilated itself within the architecture of the state and within the architecture of the institutional aspects of the state, and more importantly, to what extent did he, as deputy president in the second administration of Jacob Zuma, what did he do in terms of trying to mitigate the risks and lessen the scourge of the state capture? And I think that's where we find ourselves in terms of a fork in the road, because at one level, the challenge is, how much did the president know as deputy president, also bearing in mind that he was serving in the capacity of the former president? And more importantly, I think it was, what were the interventions that he put into place to try and pull it back? And if you listen to his testimony and you watch the way he has approached the questions, he was very cautious. He didn't want to implicate people. It did come to certain aspects of his testimony, when probed further, he was able to provide some names, but he didn't really want to do it. There was a reluctance to do that. And I suspect the reason being is that he also has to think about what the forward-looking plan is. If we take his closing remarks yesterday afternoon to the commission about this forward-looking narrative plan in terms of the reform agenda, dealing with the institutional architecture where you need to plug the gaps around state capture. And I think at the end of the day, should we have had a higher expectation? I think we'd always had a high expectation that the president would be there and what we expected of him. To answer the question of the expectation, I think the fact of the matter is, there were levels of frustration. I think even in the commission itself, as they were asking, it didn't come out so explicitly, but they were trying to get to this idea that the president needed to provide at least a roadmap, or even joining the dots and creating a tapestry around which they could be able to understand at what level were you aware in your official or unofficial capacity, and at what level did you or had you been able to ventilate those kinds of reforms? Because remember, he said he took option 5 to not resign and to remain there for the long haul. Now, obviously, there's been different interpretations of whether that was done out of a strategic consideration or whether it was done because there was an ambition to become president of the party in 2017, hence of the Republic there later. So there were all of these different interpretations around what was the intention in terms of how he addressed state capture during his tenure as deputy president.
He serves two constituencies. As the country's president, he serves the nation. As the ANC president, he serves the members of the ANC. On the one hand, is the South African nation satisfied with what he had to say at the State Capture Commission. On the other hand, the supporters of the suspended Secretary General Ismagashule at the courts during the week were calling for a general counsel to be brought forward so that they can start preparing for Ismagashule to contest. Has his testimony at the Zondo Commission strengthened his hand in this constituency?
Okay, let's take the first one. The mood, the response, the kind of court of public opinion. I think it's a mixed one. I think just from what your Twitter wall was saying, I think there's mixed reaction to this commission and there's mixed reaction to the president's testimony. I think there are people out there who feel that he didn't do as much as he should have in terms of being the head of the state and, of course, the head of the ANC. Remember, he was in this government in the second administration of Jacob Zuma. Questions were, he probably knew what was going on. He probably understood the dynamics that was there. But then the challenge was how much he could have done. And I think what people were looking for, if I may be so bold as to make that interpretation, is that they were looking for the answers. They were looking for the answers, not the vagueness, not the idea that the president, was able to say that he acknowledged a lot. That's the most important thing. He acknowledged. But the other side of that acknowledgement was, well, Mr. President, you were there. Acknowledging is one thing. Doing something substantially important to mitigate and to push back, what was that? And so that level of acknowledgement and substantiveness becomes this kind of fork in the road for him. So I think in the general context of ordinary South Africans and citizens, I think there's a sense of apathy that this didn't really go as far as they wanted it to go in terms of getting the answers. Coming to the second space, the second constituency you refer to, and that is the party and what's going on in the party, I think he was cautious. He was cautious because one of the things that became quite real or quite clear in his testimony is that he's very much a procedural president. He's a president that sticks to the processes, and it came out yesterday in the testimony and in his Q&A to answer those questions about the whole report around the Sydney Mafamadi report on the State Security Agency. Why did you not think about what the recommendations of the report was? You had two members. It's still you appointed into your government. And then, of course, there was the response that I'm waiting for the Zondo Commission report and then I'll go from there. But then the point there being is you got to be decisive. You got to make sure that this report could take longer than anticipated. So you've got this lag time. And what are you going to do in this lag time? And I suspect the reason why he's taken that approach is to basically play it in a way that he talks to that constituency that you just mentioned, that constituency, those members that are sitting in the party, where I think it's still very much a fluid situation. It's not something that he could just run in gung-ho and say, right, I've decided this is what I'm going to do, and be very, very kind of not authoritarian, but just be very, very overhauling in that space. And I think the problem with that is that he has to create the impression that he is a guy that people are going to basically be able to consult with him. And that is what it is. It's about having those processes in the party and consulting. Now, whether or not that has enabled him to get the kind of trust or get the kind of dynamic in terms of it consolidates his position in the party on the NEC and, of course, other structures in the ANC, is very much a space that is still up in the context of trying to find the traction. But I guess what this means is that he was able to try and hopefully ensure that he, by not naming names or trying to be more reluctant and reticent about the names that were coming, that needed to be named, and he played it very, very, very safe. He's also trying to make sure that his position and the way he's playing the context of the party doesn't necessarily override what he needs to do. Because remember, we come back to these questions around the deployment committee. There was a very, very emphatic response to whether the top six deliberately allowed the board to collapse. He's very clear about the role of the party, and that the party, in a sense, is essentially not one that makes decisions for government. It's actually government. And I think this is where he has to navigate that space really, really strategically, because if he doesn't, then of course it makes his role as state president even that much harder. And I think that's where some of the disconnects come through.
Sanusha Naidu, thank you so much for your time.